I'm really excited to talk about how you can scale your agents toolkit by extending the function tools it has using one of our newest products that we have at Paragon called ActionKit. So first I want to start off with just describing what a function tool is, or a tool for an AI agent. And I think that'll give us really good context into what ActionKit actually does and how we can actually scale the number of tools you can provide to an agent really quickly and easily and effectively as well. So first, I'm going to show OpenAI's official documentation on what they call a tool. All the big LLM providers like Claude, OpenAI, all the open source ones as well, usually will have some sort of implementation of tools. And what a tool actually is you provide an agent with a custom function that it can run given a description when this function should be used, as well as parameters like the inputs to a function that it needs to run the actual block of code that you want to give it. So in this example, it's a classic one about getting weather. This is something an LLM probably can't do with its trained data. It needs live data, so you probably want to provide a function where it can actually get weather. So first we have a description when it should be used, whenever a user wants to get the current temperature. It needs some parameters, location. And then whenever the AI agent decides that that description is relevant for a user's prompt, it'll call that function and run a block of code that you provide it. So in this one, it's getting weather using latitude and longitude. So that's basically how tools can extend a AI agent and give it the ability to get live data to perform actions on a user's behalf. And that's what we want to show in today's demo with Pareto. So Pareto is a chatbot that we built using Paragon to enable integrations, where you can think of this as an application where a user can give Pareto access to a whole bunch of endpoints and data from their integrations that they use every day, like Salesforce, like Google Drive, like Notion, like Slack. So let's get started with an example. So before I send this, we actually, in this tutorial, we allowed users to manually select all the different tools that you could possibly give Pareto, right? So in Salesforce, we have a whole litany of different tools because there's a whole lot of things you can do in Salesforce. There's a whole bunch of unique configurations. And so let's just get started with a really simple example, creating a record contact. And in this example, I'm also going to, for our contact, not only give them the name, but also say, put a unique field called budget under a custom field called BANT. So let's run this. And we get a successful creation. Let's go to the show events real quick, and we can see that a tool is called Salesforce Create Record Contact, as well as some inputs. So let us go into Salesforce and see, give it a little refresh. We see a new contact created for me, Jack. And real quick, let us go to details. And for our custom field BANT, we see our agent successfully put in a budget of $10,000, just like we said. Awesome. Let's go to another example just to show off some more actions that Pareto can do. So under Slack, let us give it the ability to search messages. I'm going to ask Pareto to search Slack for any messages that reference memes because I think it's sort of a non-sensitive topic. And again, we can see that Pareto has called the Slack search messages tool that we gave it access to here. And we have a bunch of messages. Brian referenced, am I the new meme king? And I'd probably say yes, and that my memes are on point. So we can see that actions are actions in a third-party integration provider. That's really useful for not only performing update, write actions like creating Salesforce, even on custom fields, but also with querying, right? Essentially these read, get actions. And that brings us to an interesting question because I think a lot of RAG implementations are using vector search and, essentially ingesting all this data and inserting it and indexing it into a vector database. Is that still necessary when you have access to function tools that can query information directly from third parties? And I think the answer is it really depends, for endpoints or for providers that provide endpoints or, a query interface where you can search, for example, this is a Slack provided one, or like in Salesforce, you can search for contacts and they provide like a SOQL, like a SQL type language. It might be more useful to search and query at prompt time to perform RAG. But for maybe more unstructured data sources or ones where you need to synthesize a lot of information, or it's a little bit more of like a complex operation, I think RAG ingesting the data upfront still has its place. So I'm going to give an example, right? For Google Drive, we see these actions. You can like get file, you can get folder and list files, but it might be a little bit harder to search, content from a bunch of Google Docs or Google Slides. And so an example is we have a Google slide with some information on permissions and how Paragon sort of fits into a permissions use case for RAG applications. So I'm going to ask, and here we're using more traditional like vector search to perform retrieval augmented generation. we see from our question about permissions, there's some information about like unifying permissions, there's different strategies, pre-retrieval, post-retrieval enforcement, and it gave me a source. And basically we ingested this file, this Google Slides file, and inserted it into our vector index. And just to verify, we have some information about reback, like it was referenced, pre-filter, post-filter. And so we can see that this is a little bit more of a complicated question than just a keyword search or a simple like get contact. It takes a little bit more nuance and contextual information from unstructured data. And this is where we still see data ingestion and upfront vector indexing still come into play as a really valuable practice for RAG. And so even though we provided actions where we can provide our Pareto application tools that it can use to query, that it can use to do these quick actions that are synchronous, there is still, use cases that are better for workflows where, we need to maybe ingest all of a user's Google Drive files upfront. And this is more of a large job, long-running, asynchronous type job, getting all their data from these unstructured sources and processing them, chunking them, and indexing them to a vector database. This is still a really good job for workflows. And so this is our stance on, querying versus, data ingestion for RAG. And we think both have their place essentially. So now we went over all of this information. How exactly does ActionKit, where we provide function tools, how does this all work? I'm gonna jump into our code real quick and I'll zoom in a bit. And we can see it's really easy. So Paragon's ActionKit provides a set of a couple APIs where you can run a whole bunch of different actions. And essentially these actions are used to provide tools that are really scalable. You can increase the number of tools and give it access really quickly and easily. And that's what we wanted to have in mind when designing ActionKit. So if we can see up here, this line is all it takes to get all the available actions that we have in Paragon. It's a GET request where we hit our ActionKit API. There's a little bit of authentication and authorization here. And we can see there's also, a couple flags that are sort of optional, but you can list, a specific integration you want. You can list maybe a category like CRM integrations, or you can just give your agent access to all the tools it has available from all the integration providers that you have enabled in Paragon. So after you hit this GET endpoint, what does that data look like? So the GET endpoint essentially returns JSON that essentially returns these actions like Gmail, send, email, provides descriptions like when it should be used, and then any parameters it has, such as like who it's going to be sent to, who it's from, the subject. I'm going to find another example with one of the actions that we just used. If we go to Slack, if you remember the Slack search messages, this is exactly the action we used in an early example. We have a description of when it should be used, and the only parameter it needs is a query parameter where it is a search query. So this should look really similar. I'm going to jump back to the OpenAI docs of how a tool should look provided to an LLM, right? You need a description, you need parameters, data types, and this is all available through the Get Actions API. Now that we know how to get the actions, how do we actually call these actions? So again, we can just provide all that data, all those parameters and descriptions to a function tool. And in the function tool, the only other thing that we need to define is essentially what chunk of code gets run when that function tool is ready to be called. And here it's still a call to the ActionKit API, but here it's a post request. And inside that post request, we just need to specify the action name and all the parameters that it needs to actually run that action, such as the search messages or the send email action. So that's all it takes. It just takes maybe 10, 20 lines of code to give it access to a whole bunch of actions in a whole array of third-party integration providers. And so lastly, what we wanted to show is it's a really scalable process. You can give it access to a whole bunch of tools very quickly, but you can also customize the behavior of these tools if you want more of this like fine-grained control over when your agent is calling functions and calling actions. So we defined a custom one called chain get notion contents with search. And so basically this gets run, it calls the get page content whenever a user is searching for a page. And so we provided a description and we provided a function with the exact action that we want to be called using ActionKit. And if we go back to our demo, let's enable the search pages action and we can ask a question. So I have a grocery list in my Notion and I just want to search what was on it. If we go to the search events, we can see it called the Notion search pages function tool using ActionKit's just native action. But we also defined a function earlier, right? The chain get Notion page. And so once the search pages return an ID, we can use that ID and immediately search the contents so we can get what's on my grocery list. And so that's all there is to this demo. We hope you find ActionKit really useful for scaling the amount of integration actions you can give to your AI agent through function tools. And if you have any questions or would like to learn more about ActionKit and Paragon, please feel free to reach out. Thanks.